Well, welcome back. So this is going to be a quick review and a exhaustive range test for the ABEC11 107mm wheels on a Evolve Carbon GT. A quick review of the wheels. For anyone that's got the GT tires on their all-terrain board, or all-terrain tires on their GT board, they you get really spoiled really fast. Those tires, they go over everything, and there is no kind of guesswork as far as what you can get over or not. I mean, it is pretty black and white. The obstacles are enormous, and then you go, oh, can't get over it. So I was a little concerned going from a couple hundred miles on the GT tires to, or the all-terrain tires, I keep doing that. After going a couple hundred miles on the all-terrain tires, I was a little leery about going to a solid compound tire, or wheel. And I can tell you right now that the 107s, that's a big wheel. It's a big wheel. There is obviously a difference between the solid compound and a pneumatic. There is a difference there, but it is nowhere near as great as I had thought there was going to be. Now, with that said, the caveat is still that the GT tires, the all-terrain tires, dang it, the all-terrain tires, there is an 1.5 inch additional axle clearance on those all-terrain tires. That doesn't sound like a lot, but boy, when you're bombing around in a city that maybe doesn't have the best streets or sidewalks, man, it really is a pretty major difference. So for me, it was a return to what I remember longboarding feeling like. The 107s, they coast when you are going down hills or come off the throttle. They give the same kind of a feel that one is used to with a longboard. The GT tires, the AT tires, you can feel that it's more squishy, and as soon as you come off the throttle, you have that initial desire of the board to come to a halt. So right away, as soon as you put the solid compound wheels on, right away you quickly understand, oh, these are going to go a lot farther. The range results back that up entirely, and totally back that up. Now, for our range test, what I did was I mapped out and triple checked, triple verified a course that was relatively flat and was exactly 2 miles. So what I did was every 2 miles of the course, I coasted the board to a stop and checked the amount of power showing on the remote. And then what I did was, after coming to speed, I checked the percentage of the board remaining under load, because these Evolve skateboards, they give a different reading, obviously, when they're under load. The idea being that while you're riding the board, you're going to best be able to judge the use at a glance. Are you going uphill? Is that why it went down? Are you on a flat? Is there more hill to climb? And so that allows the rider then to say, oh, okay, you know, I need to back off, or, you know, I'm just going to schlep it up this hill, or... But for the purpose of the range test, it was important, I thought, to show both numbers. And that also shows the sag with the battery and the disparity between what the board shows under load and what the board shows at rest. Now, when you first start out, the two are very similar. The under load and the at rest are pretty close to 100 for quite a while. And again, I'll go over that. We'll go over the numbers. But to start off with, let's go over how we set this test up. First, like I said, I mapped out a course that was exactly 2 miles, and then recorded my weight, which is right at the maximum for the board, right at 218, 220. That's what happens when you get old and fat. So we're not giving the board any breaks there as far as its weight goes. And the wheels, like I said, are the 107 millimeter ABEC11s, and I'm using the 38 tooth gear. I don't need the extra speed, and my focus on this test was to say, okay, well, if somebody's going to be using this board to commute on, then what will they get? What, honestly, are they going to be able to expect from the range on the board? So again, went with the 38 tooth. I'll probably retest this again with the AT with the all-terrain tires for comparison, and also with the probably with the faster, with the 32 tooth rear sprocket. And we might get surprised. I don't know. Electric motors are a funny thing. Sometimes they have sweet spots, and so we might get surprised when we retest. Maybe we'll somehow hit that sweet spot. Don't know. That's why we do these things, eh? So anyway, 107 millimeter wheel, 38 tooth, and a 220 pound fat old rider. So with that, let's go over the numbers. All right, let's get straight into the numbers, since that's obviously why you're even watching this video. This is a video I've actually wanted to do for quite a while. And riding the board, even with the all-terrain tires on, you ride and you ride and you ride, and then you wonder, Jesus, how far have I gone? And after you've been on the board for an hour, it dawns on you that that you're really on something else now. It's no longer this kind of a last mile solution. So, with that in mind, the test was broken into 3 sections. The first section of the test I did at 11 miles an hour. It was recorded as 10 miles an hour, but I was using the old remote, and the old remote doesn't have a calibration setting for the ABEC11 107 millimeter wheels. So because the course was very accurately measured out, it allowed me to figure out how much the remote was off, and it was off by almost exactly 1/10. And so consequently, the 10 mile an hour indicated on the remote means that all of these numbers were actually done at 11 miles an hour. So the trick there was that man, trying to, when you've got a board that's capable of 20 plus miles an hour, keeping it at 10 miles an hour was like figuring out how many licks it takes to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop. It just takes an incredible amount of trigger discipline to not accelerate further harder. So all of these were done on eco mode to try and get things as smooth as possible. The course that I laid out was almost all right turns here in the US. When you're making a right turn, you're usually not crossing traffic, and so that meant that I could maintain that speed over that 2-mile course. At the end of each 2 miles, what I would do is I would come across a flat section just prior to the end start point and be able to get the board to an equilibrium. So then I would check the amount of percentage of power that I had left shown under load, then allow the board to coast to a stop at the end of that 2 miles, allow it to relax for a moment, then record what its relaxed voltage was. And so that gives you an idea when you're looking at this chart of if you have this particular board that you're able to then look and say, okay, well, I have approximately this many miles left if I'm showing this at rest voltage. And the interesting thing will be to track that as we go. Certainly if some folks have older boards, it would be interesting to see you guys do this exact same thing, repeat this exact same thing, and then post your numbers. It'd be really interesting, how do these numbers differ when the board ages? How do these numbers differ if you do a lot more miles than I do? Cumulative, I have about 300 miles or so on this board, about 200 miles with the AT tires, and probably just a little under 100 miles with the ABEC11s. So again, here's what we got. So at using the ABEC11 107mm wheels with a 38 tooth sprocket, 218-pound rider, the 11 mile an hour numbers, the first 2 miles showing 99% on the board while it was under load. In other words, while it was traveling at 11 miles an hour on a flat surface, came to rest and went to 100%. 4 miles, again, we're showing 98%, still pretty close to 100%, then 100% at rest. 6 miles, 97%. 8 miles, 95%. So you can see that you've already gone a considerable distance, and now the board is showing still relatively up in that last 5% or so. At rest at 8 miles is 97%, and so it's interesting to to see how that then changes over the next few miles. 10 miles, 90%, 94. Now we're starting to see that the under load voltages are looking a little closer to the at-rest voltages. 12 miles, 88%, 90%. Really, basically the same thing. Now you're seeing 81%, 85, 16 at 74. So now what we're starting to notice is that you're showing 74%, but now at the 16-mile mark, that's roughly getting towards the 14-mile mark, is roughly getting half of your range, yet you're showing 80%. And so the reason for that, and I think that led to a lot of confusion as far as the the riders were concerned, maybe sending some hate mail to Evolve saying, hey, I'm not, these numbers aren't matching up. But what you have to remember is that the percents that are shown on the remote, they're based on how much in percent the battery is above the state at which it will no longer power the board, hence 0, to 100% charge. All right? And so as you start to ride, then you get into that situation where the voltage sag under load. The greater the load, if you're going uphill, it will show that lower percent. So what you're actually reading is, you're actually reading that voltage drop on the battery, and the voltage drop is a lot greater when when it's under load. And so that's really why I did this chart, so that folks would have a way to kind of see where they're at. And again, the caveat to that is that this is on a board that's got around 300 miles on it. So, and now as we start going down, you know, 18 miles, 60%, 20 miles, 40%, 56% at rest, 22, you got 40%, 50% at rest. Now we're into that point where you're showing roughly half of the voltage drop, but obviously you've gone now 2/3 of your total range. 22 miles, you get 40%. 24, 32. 26 miles is 20%. Man, you know, I can't stress how it's difficult to stress how far 20 miles is on a skateboard. I was just absolutely amazed. And then the thing just keeps going. And, you know, 26 miles, 28 miles. At 29 miles, now the board is, it'll still get up to speed, but now it's struggling a bit to try and get there. And I thought, okay, well, you know, realistically, you know, where are we? At this point, you'd either be charging your board or you'd be home. I didn't figure that there was any further point in pressing it out any further. I probably could have gotten 30 miles off of it, but what would be the point? So then at that point, I went back, recharged the board, actually partially charged the board, and then the following day did the next segment of the test. Now, at 10 miles an hour, man, that was really slow. At 11 miles an hour, that was really slow. It seemed like though you were still moving, and certainly at a pace that maybe somebody would gently pedal a bicycle. It just seemed like I wasn't being realistic about how fast anybody would normally do the board. The 11-mile-an-hour test was still important because if you have a longer way to go, it allows you then to look at that chart and say, okay, you know, I can actually eke out a certain more percent of miles by slowing down, and it does. It is actually quite dramatic. It's only a speed difference of 4 miles an hour between 11 miles an hour and the 15 that I did the check. But as you'll see, it makes a considerable difference. The choice of 15 miles an hour was kind of arbitrary. The way that I arrived at that was that I rode around and thought, okay, well now I'll get to a speed at which I normally ride, and then I'll check to see what speed that was. And because I wasn't concerned with that speed, again, it was being an arbitrary speed of just the speed that I felt was enough clip that would be satisfactory, that I'd be satisfied that I was actually moving. It actually alters. It alters depending on your terrain and what's around you and whatnot. And I found that because I wasn't concentrating on the speed, that every time I looked at it, it would vary quite a bit, generally between 12 or 13 miles an hour all the way up to about 17 or 18 miles an hour. And a lot, again, just depended on, you know, the surface and what was around you and your comfort level. And so all those things generally kind of changed slightly throughout the ride when I was checking to try and determine what speed the next part of the test would be done at. But I came up with 15 miles an hour, and so then did the test, redid the test on the fully charged board. Again, as soon as it was fully charged, off of the charger it came, boom, went straight to the test. If others have experiences of, you know, after you unplug and wait a half an hour or wait 20 minutes or an hour. What differences are there? Could there be with those? Don't know. But it'll be interesting to have you guys comment on that. So now what we've got here is the 15 mile an hour test, and so what you see here is that the total distance that I was able to travel under at 15 miles an hour was 22 miles or so. So a reduction. A reduction of about 6 or 7 miles, maybe 8 miles, if you want to really kind of argue the point. But it was interesting to see the fall off. The fall off happens quite suddenly after 12 miles. You start to really see that. 12 miles, you're looking at around 76%, 81% on the thing. And then 1458, huge drops across there. 16 miles, you're looking at 46, 34, and 16, and so especially as the battery gets further depleted, then the extra stress really kind of peels off those miles pretty quickly. And so then the third part of the test was real world. Now, the way that I set up the real world test was similar in a way to the way that I decided the 15 mile an hour test, in that I wasn't going to look at the speed on the remote. I wasn't going to allow the indicated speed to dictate how fast I went. I was going to have the only things that were concerned were the conditions. What was the surface I was riding on? Was there traffic around? Whatnot? And then go on a real world journey. Now in this case, I had to make a trip to Lowe's, and the round trip to the Lowe's is about 13 miles. The route that I took to get there was about 7 miles. The route that I took to get back was slightly under that. And so, but the total was almost exactly 13 miles. Again, verified by, I actually drove the route in the car and verified it on Google Maps and also via GPS. And so it was spot on all three of those. I didn't obviously have a way to measure the exact distance on the board. It would have been nice to get that verification to match up the shown distance on the remote to the results of the test. But I didn't have the new R2 remote at the time. That arrived actually just as I came back from the real world test. But the real world test, again, over the course of 13 miles, it took me over an overpass, and so basically that meant that there was a climb getting over there, and then climb getting back, so I'm sorry, there was two overpasses on that. As well as a good deal of sidewalk riding and transitions from broader streets where I was actually able to open the board up a little bit more, and then tighter areas where speeds were constrained. The thing to notice about that, and now let's go ahead and I'll bring up a graphic that shows all of these together, all of these side by side. So the thing that to note about the real world driving is that it was very dynamic. There was a lot of accelerating and decelerating, and then there was also obviously the two climbs, the two elevation changes, and so all totaled, that 13 miles, if you look at the where they fall on the charts, that 13 miles equates more to about the 20 mile mark at 10 miles an hour, and the 16 mile at the 15 range, and so pretty close. You can kind of see about where that all landed. So it's interesting to see how this compares to a best case scenario where you're just going around a relatively smooth, relatively flat track where you're not changing your speeds. So your real world range on this, you know, if we can, you know, we can apply a little math to that, is somewhat reduced. So you're looking at a real world range on these wheels that, with you know, with kind of a mixed driving of somewhere around 22 miles. Still pretty good, pretty healthy. I want to repeat this though using the all-terrain tires. Now the reason I want to do that is that it'll be interesting to see how the real-world mileage differs from using the solid compound wheels to the AT wheels. Do these actually maybe help somehow in a real-world situation where the riding style is maybe more dynamic? If I'm spending more time accelerating to manage the transitions with these wheels as opposed to maybe going a little slower over some of those obstacles, rolling over some of those obstacles with the AT wheels, it'd be interesting to see, because from what I've seen, my range seems to be right around 15, 18 miles using these, whereas the total real world range of the ABEC11s seems to be right around there, around the 22-mile mark. So that'll be an interesting one maybe to do in the future. So I hope this was helpful. I hope it was something interesting to see. It is pretty cool to see the numbers, you know, as you go. It'd be very interesting to hear back from some of you to see how your numbers match up, and then maybe get some data from you as far as your personal boards. How long have you had them? How many charge cycles have they gone through? That's something that I should have pulled up to record. I'll probably have to do maybe a follow-up video on this one in 6 months after I've put some more miles on the board and a few more charge cycles, and then we'll repeat this to see maybe how it changes over time. There were some YouTube videos where they were showing quite a bit of a cascade failure of the battery. So stay tuned. Should be fun. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you found this interesting. Feel free to like and subscribe, and we're going to be doing some videos on our energy sovereignty project coming up pretty soon, and that should also be kind of interesting. And we've got a couple other skate videos that we're putting up all kind of at the same time. Some reviews of the new R2 remote. So again, till next time, thanks for watching.